To my surprise, the next few hours weren't as awful as I'd feared. Most customers were polite, and even those who were less so backed off when I stood my ground. As the evening wore on, I noticed something unexpected: the way people looked at me. Some were fascinated, some were intimidated, and a few were clearly captivated. For the first time, I felt a strange kind of power in this new identity. But the night was far from over. When the last customer left and Diane locked the doors, I sighed with relief. "May I get changed now, please?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gave me a long, unimpressed look. "Come with me, Charlotte. I have one more task for you." My stomach tightened as I followed her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The air was heavier here, colder somehow. I could hear raised voices, laughter, movement, coming from a room ahead. "Tonight," Diane said, turning to face me with a strange smile, "you're going to learn an important lesson about obedience." The door swung open, and what I saw made my heart race. Molly was there, clearly uncomfortable and visibly shaken, as two men barked instructions at her. The situation felt wrong, predatory, humiliating, and I instinctively took a step back. "This is part of the arrangement," Diane said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Our best clients expect special treatment, and I expect you to cooperate." I froze. This wasn't what I had signed up for. This wasn't the fantasy of control and consent I had once imagined. This was something else entirely. Something darker. When I hesitated, Diane stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low hiss. "You can leave if you want. But if you do, you'll never see Miss Rachel again. All your progress, all your effort, gone. Or you can stay and do as you're told." Every instinct screamed at me to run. But fear, shame, and a twisted sense of loyalty held me in place. I realized, with a sickening clarity, that I was no longer in control, and maybe I never had been. Mistress Diane's voice cut through the stale air like a whip. "Such a silly little puppet. Still, you'll learn." Before I could react, Molly stepped out of the shadows. Gone was the timid assistant who had helped me dress earlier. Now her expression was empty, mechanical, almost rehearsed. She whispered coldly in my ear, "Do what she says. It's easier that way." I barely had time to protest before Diane looped a hooked pole through the ring on my collar. With expert precision, she jerked it downward, forcing me to stumble and drop to my knees. One of the men, the same cruel customer I'd seen bullying Molly earlier, stepped behind me and snapped a pair of cold, heavy cuffs around my wrists. I struggled, but every tug only made the restraints dig deeper into my skin. "This is how obedience is taught," Diane purred, circling me like a predator with her prey. "You thought this was all about costumes and games? No, little one. This is about control. Total, unquestioning control." The room closed in around me. The two men loomed like executioners, their faces twisted with amusement. I felt the pole push harder, forcing me to bow until my forehead nearly touched the floor. My heart thundered in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go, no exit, no allies. Even Molly watched from the corner, her eyes darting to the ground, too frightened to intervene. "Here's how this works," Diane said, crouching down until her lips were inches from my ear. "You will stay perfectly still. You will obey every order. And if you resist, we will make sure every embarrassing detail of tonight ends up online. Every photo, every name, every trace of your secret life. You think your family wouldn't love to see their precious child exposed to the world like this?" The room spun. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a fantasy anymore, it was a trap. Every ounce of power I'd thought I had, every illusion of choice, dissolved under the weight of her words. They weren't going to harm me physically. They didn't have to. They were weaponizing fear, humiliation, and shame, and they knew exactly how deep those wounds would cut. Diane tilted my chin up with the tip of her boot. "Good," she whispered. "You're starting to understand. Submission isn't about pleasure. It's about surrender." In that moment, something inside me broke. Not in the way Diane intended, not into blind obedience, but into a cold, crystalline awareness. This wasn't devotion. This was exploitation. And if I didn't find a way out, they would own every piece of me, body, mind, and future. As the men laughed and Diane gloated, I stared at the floor and quietly made myself a promise. I would play along for now. I would endure the humiliation. But one day soon, I would turn their cruelty back on them, and none of them would ever see it coming. I barely spoke on the journey home. As soon as the door clicked shut behind me, the weight of it all crashed down. I stumbled into my room, collapsed onto the bed, and wept. The humiliation, the betrayal, it was unbearable. Everything I had believed about trust and devotion now felt like a cruel joke. I rocked back and forth for hours, replaying every detail in my head. How had I let it go this far? How had I surrendered so completely to someone who had so little regard for my boundaries? The person I had trusted with my most vulnerable self had twisted that trust into something ugly, and worst of all, a part of me hated that I hadn't seen it coming. By morning, one thing was clear. I had to stand up to Miss Rachel. I couldn't allow the cycle of manipulation to continue. We had talked endlessly about my fantasies and my limits, and she had crossed them. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she had misunderstood. But I had to speak up. I tried to steel myself as I prepared for our next meeting. I still dressed carefully, not because I wanted to please her, but because I knew open defiance would only make things worse. As I scrubbed away the remnants of last night's humiliation from the maid's dress, I rehearsed what I would say. This would be the first time I had ever challenged her authority. When the time came, she was waiting for me as always. Her smile was bright and cheerful. "You look beautiful, dear," she cooed. "I hear you made quite an impression last night." "I'm glad." The words burned. My hands trembled. "Yes, well, I need to say something," I stammered. "Last night, that was not what I wanted. That's not what I agreed to. You can't treat me like that." The smile vanished. In its place, a cold, unrecognizable fury settled on her face. "Don't you dare tell me what I can do," she hissed. "You are mine. You belong to me. And you'd better get used to it." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. Then, without another word, she pasted a link into the chat window. "Look at this," she said. A new page loaded, and my blood turned to ice. At the top of the page was a headline, "English Sissy Seeks Master." Below it, a series of images loaded one by one. My face. My clothes. My humiliation. She had posted photos and videos of me online. Clips from our webcam sessions. Security footage from the shop. Even screenshots of messages I had written under her direction, begging for attention, revealing every secret part of myself. There was a gallery of images I didn't even know existed. A short video of me curtsying. Another of me serving customers. And below it all, my email address, open to the world. A message board for strangers to comment. And then, as if to prove how deep the betrayal went, a new message notification blinked in the corner of my screen. The first of many I knew. My stomach dropped. I felt sick. It wasn't just humiliation anymore, it was blackmail. Miss Rachel had built a digital prison, and I was locked inside it. "You see," she said softly, "you don't get to walk away from this. Not now. Not ever." At first, I didn't even process what I was seeing. My eyes drifted down the page, and then I froze. There, at the very bottom, were my full name, my address, and my phone number. It was as if someone had stripped me completely bare and pinned my identity to a public notice board. When I looked up, Miss Rachel was watching me with a look of quiet triumph. In her hand was a phone. With deliberate slowness, she tapped a button. A moment later, a phone rang on the table behind me, my phone. I turned reflexively, and before I could move, she pressed another button. The ringing stopped. "As you can see," she said coolly, "I've done my homework. I know everything about you, Sophie, absolutely everything. And that website you're looking at? It's live. Right now. The world can see it. I'll take it down in 30 minutes, but if you ever displease me again, I'll put it back up. Maybe for an hour. Maybe for a day. Maybe I'll email it directly to people you know. Your parents use AOL, don't they? Maybe I'll send it to them. Or perhaps I'll share it with your college." Imagine the headlines then. My blood turned to ice. My heart hammered in my chest. The rushing in my ears drowned out her voice. She wasn't bluffing. She had the power to destroy me. "You belong to me," she said softly. "Body and soul. And you'd better get used to it. Because things are going to be very, very different from now on. I felt my breath catch. There was no way out. Every door, every escape route had been sealed. I think it's time we met in person, she said finally. Write this down. An address appeared on my screen. Somewhere near Bristol. I scribbled it down with trembling hands. On Saturday, I'm hosting a small dinner party for some close friends. You will serve us. I expect you to arrive at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, wearing your uniform. And nothing else. She described, in excruciating detail, what I was to say when I arrived and how I was to behave once inside. Then she smiled that cold, knowing smile again. I will check your car. If I find so much as a spare change of clothes, I'll drop your keys into the gutter and leave you standing there. Do you understand? The color drained from my face. She was ordering me to make a 3-hour drive across the country, dressed in a humiliating costume. I pictured the questions from curious strangers, the stares at gas stations, the disaster if my car broke down. It was a waking nightmare. And yet, what choice did I have? If I refused, she would expose everything: my name, my secrets, my identity. My life would be over. That night, I stopped thinking like a free person and started thinking like someone trapped. I made plans. If I had to do this, I would do it with as little risk as possible. The next morning, I serviced my car and filled 2 large fuel cans, determined to avoid any stops along the way. I studied a map and marked her address. The house was in a rural area, isolated, private. That terrified me even more. On Friday, I forced myself to eat a large meal, even though it felt like a condemned man's last supper. I set my alarm for 4 a.m. to ensure I could leave before any neighbors might see me. When the alarm rang in the darkness, I lay still for a moment, hoping it had all been a dream. Then reality slammed back into focus. My hands trembled as I dressed. I checked the street below empty before stepping outside. As the lock clicked behind me, a thought crossed my mind that chilled me to the bone. I had no idea when or if I'd ever come back. When I reached the car, a small thought crossed my mind. There was an old blanket on the back seat. It wasn't clothing. Not really, but it was something. Something to wrap around myself. Something to make me feel a little less exposed. I pulled it over my shoulders and prayed it might hide enough of the humiliating outfit beneath. The first stretch of the drive was eerily calm. I didn't see another soul for nearly 20 minutes. But as soon as I reached the motorway, the weight of my situation became impossible to ignore. My heart pounded as I clung to the slow lane, trying to disappear into the background. Every car that passed felt like a spotlight, every driver a potential witness to the shame I was hiding under that blanket. Near Bristol, I turned off onto a smaller road, one that twisted through miles of dark, dense woodland. It was quieter there, too quiet. The silence pressed in on me until it was almost suffocating. I pulled over into a secluded clearing, refilled the petrol tank from one of the cans, and tried to rest. But sleep wouldn't come. My nerves were raw, my thoughts racing in relentless circles. By the time the clock crept toward 2:40 p.m., my hands were trembling as I restarted the engine. This was it. The point of no return. The closer I got, the more surreal everything became. At first, the roads were empty, but soon I began to see people, walking dogs, chatting on corners, going about their ordinary Saturday lives. I hunched down behind the wheel, praying no one would notice me. I circled the block once, then twice, my vision tunneling until all I could see was the rising number on the dashboard clock. Finally, I parked. And the moment I cut the engine, a cold certainty settled over me. Miss Rachel owned me now. All the little lies I'd told myself, that maybe she'd let me go, that maybe this was temporary, evaporated like mist. I understood, at last, that she never would. The walk toward the house felt like walking toward my own execution. The street was empty but for the distant sound of birdsong and the sharp click of my heels on the pavement, each one louder than the last, like a ticking clock. A small child turned a corner ahead, stared at me, and pointed. His mother pulled him away without a word. And then there it was.